The Aspen Ideas Festival, and I love these sessions, and I particularly love the topic that we're going to get into, and I'm so thrilled all of you are here. And this is, despite having this giant tent, we have an intimate enough room that we can have a quality conversation with all of you. And I see a lot of great friends here that I know who are not shy, Huda Faruqi, Wolfgang Portzig, and others that have been colleagues. We're here with Michael Froman, who is the 11th United States Trade Representative. How many of you remember the last trade representative we had? Anyone? See, you're in the trade business. You don't have. Who was the last one? Yeah, so you're raising a point for me. So Mike Froman, you know, we used to know Carla Hills and Mickey Cantor, Charlene Barshevsky. I could go through them all because it's sort of an addiction of mine. But Mike Froman at USTR and Penny Pritzker at the Department of Commerce today, Secretary of Commerce, in my mind are the two most important economic gladiators and sort of bridge makers for the country that we have today. And we have a chance to sort of know our US trade representative again. And to remember, I keep telling about the importance of celebrity if you're in a position like his. So Mike, how do you feel like that you're helping to sort of rebuild both the relevance and the stature of the US Trade Representative's office? So good to have you here.
It's great to see you, Steve. And I certainly don't feel like a celebrity, but we have a great organization at USTR. We've got a great mission. We have a very full agenda, and I think what we're doing is very much relevant to the President's overall economic agenda and to what's going on in the world and the changes in the global economy. So yes, I feel like we're on a good track.
When you took this job and President Obama called you, and there were rumors that you weren't too excited about taking it. You had a great position in the White House. You'd been chief of staff in the past in the Treasury. You worked in the private sector. What animated you to say yes and say I'm going to take this task on?
Well, it really is the combination of the agenda, which is a very full, the most robust trade agenda we've had probably in history.
Why don't we walk through it?
We can walk through it. We're negotiating right now with 11 other Asian and Western Hemispheric countries. The Trans-Pacific Partnership covers 40% of the global economy.
TPP.
TPP.
We got to teach the acronyms.
Teach all the acronyms. We have a lot of acronyms to teach today. We're negotiating TTIP, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with the European Union. We've got 3 negotiations going on right now in Geneva over information technology products. ITA, TISA, and EGA. They're about services, information technology,
Pentagon.
And environmental goods. We've got some important changes and reforms going on of our preference programs, including AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, with a very important summit of African leaders coming to Washington later this summer. So it's a very full agenda. And of course, we have these bilateral dialogues with important countries like China and India, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, where we try and work through our trade and investment issues with them as well.
Let's walk through some of these. And you just mentioned China, which is so important. I remember when I first got to know you when I worked in the Senate in the 1990s, I see an old colleague from the Economic Strategy Institute. You know, there was a time where China coming into the WTO, where permanent normal trade relations to basically do a China deal was controversial, but China was brought into the WTO. And then in the last few years, a lot of the firms that were involved with that, from General Electric to Boeing to just a whole variety of companies, say, maybe we went too fast. Maybe we saw that China is not moving along the track that they had expected, particularly with the way that US firms are treated inside the country with some of the subsidy side. And I'd be interested to get your take on whether bringing China into the World Trade Organization was a smart thing to have done, or were we too hasty? Did we kind of overlook, cut too many corners?
Well, I think it was important to bring them into the World Trading System, in part so that we would have the tools necessary to help engage with them about participating in a rules-based system and living by a rules-based system. And that's an ongoing project. We brought WTO cases against them, and when they've been found to be in violation, we get them to implement changes to their system. But certainly it's an ongoing effort to make sure that they're playing, they're taking on responsibilities commensurate with the role that they're playing in the global economy. And that's one of the ongoing tensions in the relationship between China and the global trading system.
How do you think they're doing? Do you think that China is absorbing and taking seriously the rules-based system?
I think there's a debate going on, as far as we can tell, in China. If you look at some of the developments over the last year under President Xi, the third plenum last fall said a number of very important things about where China wanted to head, how it wanted to reform its system, how it wanted to open its economy, engage more in consumer-led growth, engage more in services. Those are all very good signs, and if they followed through on those in a meaningful way and opened up their economy, I think it would be positive for them and for their trading partners, including ourselves. But we also see a number of negative data points in terms of how they're dealing on particular issues. So I think there's a debate going on within China, and our job is to engage with them and encourage reform, and to also make clear that where they violate international rules, we will hold them to account.
You know, President Obama, when he came in, said that there is a lot of untapped potential in the United States in exporting more, in negotiating these trade deals. He committed, when you came into office, in part of doubling down on these big trade deals, one with Europe and essentially the other in the sort of broad Asia-Pacific region with TPP. So can you walk us through how TPP and TTIP are going? And let's start with TPP. How are the negotiating parties looking at that? And then you've got a separate set of negotiations in Congress. But let's start with the external players before we talk about our own problems.
Well, just to put it in context, as you said, obviously 95% of the global consumers live outside the United States. The U.S. is an advanced industrialized country. We're growing at 2 to 3%. If we want to create the kind of jobs and the number of jobs that we need to create in this country, we need to have access to foreign markets. Our market's already relatively open. Our tariffs are low, about 1.5% on average. We don't use regulations as a disguised barrier to trade, but a lot of other countries do. And so what we try and do through these trade agreements, including TPP and TTIP, is lower other countries' barriers so that we can export more. We're exporting at record rates. Last year, $2.3 trillion of exports, including $148 billion of ag exports. That's the most we've ever exported in terms of agricultural products.
I mean, I know it's at all-time records, but are we at where we should be?
Well, we can always do more, and that's exactly why we want to reduce these barriers through these trade agreements, make sure we're leveling the playing field through these trade agreements. So when you're
negotiating trade and they get everything because our markets are open and theirs are not, what's our leverage?
Well, look, the leverage is they want to be with us. They want to be working with us. And if you take TPP, for example, it's a key part of our rebalancing strategy towards Asia, and our Asian partners very much want the U.S. to be fully engaged in that region. And they view TPP, and we view TPP, as a concrete manifestation of that rebalancing agenda. So we're working with our TPP partners both to open their markets, but also to set high standard rules on everything from labor and environment to intellectual property rights. This will be the first agreement ever that creates disciplines on state-owned enterprises to make sure that when state-owned enterprises compete with our private firms, they're doing so on a level playing field. This will be the first trade agreement that defines rules for the digital economy to make sure, which is such an increasingly important part of our economy, including for small and medium-sized businesses, to make sure that there's a free flow of data across borders, that you don't have to locate in a country in order to serve that market.
Now, is there a Chinese trade official over there that's basically waking up every morning and saying, what can I do to give Mike Froman a bad day?
Sometimes it seems that way, certainly. Look, I think the China relationship... I mean,
they're out negotiating their own trade deal in Asia, right? And they're not part of ours and we're not part of theirs.
That's right, that's right. And I think our vision for TPP is that it is an ambitious, high standard, comprehensive agreement. We think this is the way to go, both for this region and for the global economy, so to raise standards.
How are we doing it? How are you, I mean, let's just imagine this is a competition between you and this Chinese trade official. So how are you doing vis-a-vis your competition?
Well, it's not, we don't view it as a competition.
Well, I do.
Per se. I don't view it as a competition per se. I think it's important for everybody that we have a high standard global trading system and that countries aspire to that level of
when a Chinese trade official goes to Thailand or goes to Indonesia, what are they offering that you're talking about high standard deals. High standard deals also involve more costs, and they involve more costs for
abundant sources of affordable and cleaner energy, sometimes a quarter of the price of our competitors in places like Germany. I get visited regularly by companies, European companies or other companies, who say, with all of those advantages, when you finish these trade agreements, TPP and TTIP, the US will be at the center of a free trade area covering 2/3 of the global economy. And that makes the US the production platform of choice, the place where companies want to put their next factory to serve both the US market, but also to export all over the world. And we're at that tipping point where, because of all of these good things that are happening with these trade agreements, this can be a key part of our investment strategy and a key part of our manufacturing strategy.
How many of you guys watch House of Cards? Anybody? So Beau Willimon, the creator of House, I don't know if he's here, but he's on campus. And I just binge watched a whole bunch of House of Cards to kind of rewatch the China sections. And in that, they had the Secretary of State doing, you didn't even appear. Like the avatar for Mike Froman wasn't in the show. So I'm hoping that Beau will hear this. I mean, don't you think the U.S. Trade Representative Office deserves its place in modern popular TV and kind of dealing with China?
I think we're delighted to be somewhat below the radar screen.
You're going to be below the radar.
Exactly.
That's even more reason for Beau to do this. Now, let's talk about the domestic challenges you have for a bit on some of these trade deals in TPP. And to just be blunt, to create a bumper sticker, say where Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, or others have been opposed, and I don't want to completely mangle their views, but there is a view in the United States that trade and doing more trade and opening trade deals is bad for the environment and bad for American workers, and has undermined the middle class. So can you give us your best case for why you don't agree with that summation?
Well, first of all, I think the concerns that critics of trade have, many of the concerns are legitimate, and we need to take them very seriously. But I think they're also not
Which ones are not legitimate?
They're also, I think, they're not recognizing that we're pursuing a different kind of trade policy than has ever been pursued before. And so, take TPP, for example. Not only are we lowering barriers to the markets abroad to help increase Made in America exports, but we're trying to level the playing field by raising labor and environmental standards in these countries. And so the same people who complain that we have to compete against workers who face much lower working conditions, this is exactly what we're trying to do through TPP, is raise the working conditions in other countries, both for their own sake, because it's the right thing to do, to create markets of middle-class consumers who will buy our products in the future, but also to level the playing field so that our workers and our firms can compete effectively. Our workers are the most productive in the world. We're 30% more productive than German workers. We're twice as productive as South Korean workers. And through these trade agreements, if we can raise labor and environmental standards, it will help position us as a place that can compete more effectively around the economy. So my answer to them is, in some cases they're fighting a battle that's 20 years old and not looking at what we're actually doing in this agreement. This agreement will have stronger labor provisions than ever before, stronger environmental provisions than ever before, and they will be binding and fully enforceable. And so they're very serious obligations that the other countries will take on.
Do you think, one of the things that I've just often, in March, the Atlantic organized a large economic summit, and I was able to interview Richard Trumka, who's the president of the AFL-CIO, and I asked him about trade deals and your work. And I asked him, I said, has there ever been a trade deal that you've supported? And his answer was sort of kind of a grumbling no. And I said, what would be required to do that? And what it brought to mind is a question of, in American politics, we have the drama of great debate sometimes, but you have people that have been playing in the same position for a very long time, either in the pro-trade, the anti-trade, the different side. Do we need to all step back and kind of take a new look at this, that some of our vested, built-in behaviors need to be rethought?
I think that's right. And when I listen to some of the criticism of trade, I fear they're conflating trade agreements with globalization. If we look back, America's lost more than 5 million manufacturing jobs. Now, over the last 4 years, we've gained 650,000 of them back. But I think one of the great reasons of people feeling unsure about trade negotiations is the concern that they have contributed to a decline in U.S. manufacturing jobs. Most economists agree that as between globalization and technology has a much greater impact on manufacturing jobs in America than globalization. But nobody says, let's get rid of computers. In fact, at conferences like this, we celebrate technology right and left, even though it's those efficiencies that are having an effect on our workforce in a very profound way. But even just looking at the effect of globalization is a force. it's happening. We can't turn back the tides of globalization. And I fear that people conflate globalization and trade agreements. In our view, trade agreements is how we deal with globalization. Now, we can either be shaped by globalization or we can shape it. And the way we shape it is through these trade agreements, by creating higher standard rules, by leveling the playing field, by making sure that other countries abide by their obligations.
So what's happened, when you think through the tectonics, the political tectonics of trade deals and getting support in Congress, it used to be that the Republican Party was in lockstep supportive of trade deals, that they looked at it as good for business, good for the country, et cetera. Democrats were viewed on the whole, but not exclusively, as being those that said we need to upgrade our environmental concerns, upgrade our Democrat. When you look at the Republican Party today, the Republican Party is not helping you much in terms of, they're not in the same place. So what if the vision is so compelling and so much ground has been gained, why is the message so hard to get out there, and why is there so much fragmentation, particularly in the GOP as well as in the Democrats?
I have faith that when we are done with these negotiations, and we'll only bring back what we deem to be a good agreement, an agreement that promotes jobs in the U.S., promotes growth in the U.S., strengthens the middle class, raises these standards around the world, really moves the agenda forward. I've got confidence that when people can actually look at the results of the negotiations, and when the negotiations are done, that they'll see what the benefits are, and that we'll have a coalition of support for it, and our goal is for it to be a bipartisan coalition of support. You're right that traditionally trade agreements and trade laws have been supported largely by Republicans, plus a critical mass of Democrats. We have to go back to FDR. FDR was really the first one in Cordell Hull who got the authority from Congress, sort of the precursor to Trade Promotion Authority, to go off and negotiate trade agreements. And then Kennedy took it from there and negotiated several reciprocal trade agreements. And so our goal is to build on that legacy and to have as much bipartisan support as we can. And I think if people are able to see what we're doing on labor and on environment, on striking the right balance between promoting innovation and ensuring access to medicines, what we're doing in the digital economy, I'm confident we'll get the support.
So I see Wolfgang Portzig here. We have lots of people watching online. So everyone who knows, Wolfgang heads DHL, Government Affairs in Washington, D.C., a German-based company. And so I want to talk about Europe for a minute. The NSA just told me, I can break a little news, that you just made a wager with your European counterpart. So you can tweet this. So tell us about your wager real quick.
Well, my European Union counterpart, the trade commissioner from the European Commission, is a Belgian, Carl de Gucht. And so we've bet a case of beer on the game.
And what kind of beer did you
Well, I picked a beer from the Epic Brewery in Denver, which I visited earlier this week. The Epic Brewery is a terrific brewery.
Does anybody drink Epic?
Yeah, here we go.
It's a big story.
Here.
Mike Froman went to the brewery. Some taxpayers say what's going on.
No, not at all.
So how does that fit within your job description?
Look, Epic Brewery started in Salt Lake City, expanded to Denver. They now export. In their first year, they exported to 4 countries.
Right.
They expect their exports to double this year and double again next year. They're hiring more people. They're expanding their manufacturing capacity. And to me, it underscores...
In these trade deals, do we have like beer?
Absolutely.
Beer
There's a 35% tariff on beer in Vietnam. There's an equivalent of a 50 to 100% tariff on Malaysia.
Great on Jeopardy.
And these are the kinds of barriers that we want to break down. But to me, it underscored. Epic Brewery has about 120 employees. There are 300,000 firms in the U.S. that export.
Right.
98% of them are small and medium-sized businesses. This isn't just a story about big companies exporting. It's a story about the Epic Breweries of the world, or I went to a firm called Atlas Devices in Boston that it was started by 3 guys at MIT who entered an engineering competition with some colleagues from West Point and developed this fantastic technology that allows rescue workers or soldiers or others to climb up and down ropes very quickly, to get out of harm's way, to rescue people off of boats. Half of their sales are now international.
Wow.
Right? They've only been in business, half a dozen years, and they see more and more opportunity through exports. And these are the sorts of companies that are going to benefit from these trade agreements by having rules that help define how international trade is going to go.
Do you have sort of a strategic map that says, okay, we need to go help Epic Brewery, or other beer makers or other device manufacturers? I mean, when you set the agenda for what we want to negotiate in something like TTIP or TPP, is America going out and just negotiating for negotiating's sake, or are you looking at the U.S. economy and saying we're not doing as well as we should be in certain areas? And what are some of those areas that you think we could be upping our game?
We certainly have some sectors that are that tend to have higher priority or higher potential than others. But the truth is, we are now major exporters in manufacturing, in services, and in agriculture. And so TPP and TTIP are intended to be comprehensive agreements to cover everything and to open markets on everything, both in terms of tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers.
So how are negotiations with Europe on TTIP going?
You know, they're coming along. They're coming pretty well.
Is that kind of like not so well?
No, I think they're
like
pretty
Froman,
well.
Like, you know.
This is, you know, we have a deep and broad relationship with them.
Right.
You know, we trade $1 trillion a year back and forth. We have a $4 trillion investment relationship. 13 million people on both sides of the Atlantic owe their jobs to the Transatlantic trade and investment relationship, and yet there's much more that we could do. And some of it's eliminating tariffs and traditional non-tariff barriers. The biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity that we're focusing on in TTIP is whether we can take two advanced industrialized, well-regulated economies and find ways of bridging the differences between their regulation.
I mean, maybe you would disagree with this. We sort of protect sugar, right? We protect the sugar guys, right, in the U.S. What if we gave away their protections? What would we get from the Europeans?
Well, let me put it in a slightly broader context, if you don't mind. We each have sensitive issues, but there's a lot that can be done within those sensitivities to reduce barriers. I mean, you know, for us, agriculture, as an example, you mentioned agriculture.
Sugar.
I heard that. Yeah. You know, as I mentioned, our agricultural exports going through the roof. Our agricultural exports to Europe, fairly flat. And that's not just because there are exorbitant tariffs on our agricultural products, which there are, but because, in our view, that Europe uses regulations, sanitary and phytosanitary standards on food, to keep out our products. Or they use geographic indications to keep out our products. They don't want us to sell mozzarella cheese in Europe. They say it can only come from Italy, for example. And so we think there are a lot of barriers there that we can help eliminate. There'll be interest on both sides. But the same can be true on manufacturing and on services.
Now, the other thing you've done in Colorado, I mean, you've done a lot here, which is terrific. Citizens should be happy because you really work it. You went to a center where it is disturbing to look at when the world has become more interconnected. Trade has increased, but you've been investing some time in the trade in endangered species, species near extinction, and you went to a place in Colorado. Maybe you can share a little bit about this and share this, because I think that this is an arena that's it's sort of a boutique, exotic topic, but you've really tried to mainstream a bit and kind of raise the profile of this trade in animals and whatnot that's
this is a huge issue, and it's
and what's the center in Colorado you visited?
It was the National Eagle and Wildlife Product Repository. It's part of the Fish and Wildlife Service.
I mean, they have something like 50,000.
It's an unbelievable, overwhelming warehouse of bones and skins and all sorts of things that have been illegally traded and intercepted at our border. And it's a huge issue. And President Obama launched a comprehensive wildlife trafficking strategy because it's not only an environmental issue. You know, last year, 30,000 elephants were killed in Africa, 1,000 rhinos were killed. And those products are making their way, very importantly, to the Asia-Pacific region. So it's one reason why in TPP, this is a key part of our environmental strategy. It's to have countries take on obligations to try and prevent this kind of trade. But it's become a national security issue. The groups that are poaching these animals in Africa, they're criminal groups, they're groups that are linked to terrorists like Al-Shabaab and Lord's Resistance Army, and they're funding themselves by poaching these animals, creating a huge environmental risk, a biodiversity risk, and then selling their products.
So they create off-the-books revenue streams.
Absolutely, and so it's, again, one way we can use our trade relationships, in this case with our Asia-Pacific partners, where this is a destination for so many of these products, to try and get cooperation and obligations to deal with this.
Now, when I read about it, and I read about this being a U.S.-based system, it occurred to me, these are products coming in or leaving the United States,
coming
right?
in.
Or U.S. controlled. So you're not dealing with the entire world with what you got. So who's buying this stuff in the United States? And I mean, that's the other piece of this. What is the criminal enforcement environment for that level of market inside this country?
Well, the strategy that the President has laid out and that Secretary Jewell of the Interior Department has laid out, part of it is increasing enforcement here. Part of it is working on demand reduction, so discouraging people from buying ivory, buying illegally traded products. And part of it is international cooperation and working with our partners. We can't do this alone. You know, and a lot of the products come here, but a lot of the products are ending up in Vietnam, they're ending up in China, and the Asia Pacific is a key region for this. And so in TPP, in our environmental chapter, we have focused on some of these environmental issues that are particularly prevalent in the region, like wildlife trafficking, like illegal logging, and like illegal fishing. And we're focusing for the first time on getting our hands around these issues.
So we've talked Europe, we've talked Asia. You also mentioned the African Growth and Opportunities Act. Africa is often discussed. It's often its development, in my view, and I'm on record in this, is too often approached as a philanthropic exercise as opposed to, you know, something that looks at how do you build infrastructure, what are the business reasons, what are the economic opportunities that are serious there, and what's our role? Because when I look at when, you know, not to name drop, but Bono and I had a discussion once at a dinner that we were hosting, and he said China is beating us in Africa. China is investing in Africa. China is creating the middle class in Africa 20 years from now. So I'm interested
in Africa. You've seen tremendous growth over the last 10 years or so, and not just commodity-based growth, but the emergence of new industries, the emergence of a middle class in some countries, some very good reformers across the region who are taking on the hard issues and engaging in economic reform. And so we're seeing more and more US companies interested in investing and in doing business there. And that's an important part of what we're focusing on, because I agree with you completely. We've got to move from a model where it's just aid, just assistance, and that it's more trade and investment. And that's what AGOA is all about as well. So we launched a review last year. We've been talking for 10 months now to our partners in Africa and the US business community and civil society organizations. You know, and the one clear message we've heard from everybody is AGOA is important. It helps give access to the US market for exports from Africa. But for Africans to really be able to take advantage of it, we've got to deal with a whole range of other issues that affect their competitiveness, like hard infrastructure, roads, ports, things of that sort. Soft infrastructure, things across the border. You know, we have, you know, a truck will pull up to a border and they'll wait 4 days to get through customs, and then they'll wait another 4 days to get through customs on the other side of the border. And by the time they get through customs, the agricultural products that they're carrying in the back of the truck have rotted, or they become so expensive that they can't compete with products from other parts of the world. So we've got to deal with those kinds of issues, capacity building issues, and those are the kind of questions that we're now dealing with.
You know, when I think about your life, you know, your wife is here, Nancy, and when I just think about you thinking about trade deals and negotiations all the time, and so I hesitate to ask this, but you're doing TTIP, TPP, ITA2, all the other acronyms. TISA.
EGA.
So what trade deal are
AGOA.
you not doing today that you really wish you were? Like, what's not in the Mike Froman portfolio that you say, aha, next year I'll do this one?
I think I've got enough for right now.
Really?
Just to,
you don't want to like put an extra, extra.
We've got a lot of balls in the air. We've got to land these things and ultimately get them through Congress. But I'm optimistic, and I think, as I said, at the end of the day, when we're done with TPP, when we're done with TTIP, when we're done with these agreements in Geneva that cover somewhere between 70 and 90% of the trade in those areas, we're going to have much greater access to foreign markets, and that's going to unlock opportunity for Americans in the agricultural and the services and the manufacturing sector, small and medium-sized businesses. And there's nothing that gives, I think, greater satisfaction than seeing a small firm who's hiring more people or giving higher wages because they're able to export more and make their way into foreign markets that they weren't able to make their way into before. And that's exactly what this is all about.
You know, I know you're a tough guy. You're also just a very nice guy. And when you sort of look at this trade picture, you present such a positive arena. But part of what the U.S. Trade Representative Office is tasked with is dealing with bad behaviors in the world, enforcement. I was recently in San Diego with the chairman of Qualcomm, who was talking about how, you know, Qualcomm, for those of you who don't know, is essentially responsible for a device and all the interconnectivity that we have between our cell phones around the world. It's probably one of the most important companies in the world in creating a global communications platform, and they're seeing in China long-standing business relationships where their technology was licensed and used, where those fees are just not being paid, and they see it as a result of China's national strategy of things. So a kind of collusion, if you will, between business and then at government direction. And when you look around the world outside the United States, one of the features of the global system is the rise of state capitalism, state champions, state-directed stuff. So I'm interested in how you deal with that, because that, by any measure, all around the world, that's become a bigger problem, a bigger feature of this. The United States hasn't gone that way. So are we the odd duck in a world that's moving a different direction? And how do you deal with it? What's enforcement in your world? When you're not negotiating deals, how are you enforcing
you're absolutely
deals?
right. Look, the enforcement's a critical part of what we do. And I think it's part of the social compact that if we're going to open markets through these trade negotiations, we also have to be fully committed to enforcing the rights that we negotiate for. So the president created this interagency trade enforcement center. It's brand new, where we pull resources from all different agencies, people who have language and country capabilities or who know particular sectors.
So this is like state, commerce, USTR.
Commerce, Treasury, Department of Justice, other specialized agencies, agriculture, et cetera. And we're able to put together cases that we've never been able to put together before because of the complexity of them. And we've won those cases. You know, we brought
I saw you have 18 cases. You've won 6, settled 1, and have 11 pending.
11
how do you like that
pending.
for Jeopardy?
It's not bad. Yeah. Not bad. But we bring these cases. We put a lot of emphasis on them, and we're making progress, including with China, of pointing out. For example, we brought a case where we discovered, we put together sort of a picture of various regulations at the provincial level that were leading to all kinds of subsidies for exports. And we brought the case, we won the case, and now we're bringing it against other areas, and it helps them dismantle this kind of state capitalism that you're referring to. So I think we have to be very vigilant about state capitalism, about the rise of localization ideas. This is the idea that countries have that in order to sell into a market, you need to produce in that market itself. And we're having dialogue with countries like India, Brazil, Russia, others, about what's in their best interest in the long run. Is it to build walls and stand behind those walls and build a domestic industry, sort of the old import substitution model? Or is it to be part of global supply chains and be part of globally competitive supply chains and gain the technology through that way? And it's something that we spend a lot of our effort on.
So before I get in the office, what we really like is you report directly to the president. The cool thing about the U.S. Trade Representative Office is you're in the executive office of the president. You're not like a separate department and whatnot. You hang out with Barack Obama. You know him well. So how into trade is he really? Like, does he wake up and say, Mike, how many billions of dollars have you nudged the needle? And if you haven't, I mean, Clyde Prestowitz used to talk about the fact that he said, he'd want to take a piece of reducing the trade deficit. During Clyde's time, it kind of ballooned out crazy. But our trade deficit actually declining. So I'm wondering, do you get a kickback? But more seriously, I think the interesting question I think a lot of people often have in a real term is, how much does your work really figure into the president's priorities, and does he drill in with you on this?
He does. I mean, look, the president is...
But you're not going to say he doesn't, right?
The president's a committed internationalist. Mm-hmm. He grew up, spent part of his life in Asia. I was with him on his recent trip through Asia. And everywhere you go, you just feel the trade element of that region. The fact that there are so many deals being done, that countries are negotiating with each other, that they're pairing off, that they're opening markets to each other, that businesses are trying to create cross-border linkages. And he gets that, and he understands that our economic future is very much intertwined with the economic future of the Asia Pacific, of Europe, of Latin America, and therefore we need to be part of those regions. We need to engage. And so he's been very supportive, very involved. I mean, to the point when he was in Tokyo in late April of rolling up his sleeves and talking about very specific issues of TPP with Prime Minister Abe over sushi. And so...
Did they talk cars?
They were talking agriculture more than cars, but they talked cars the next day. And so he's very much interested in the details. He understands the global economic system, and he sees these trade agreements as being a key part of our future. And as I said, as a key part of driving investment to the U.S. and helping to create this renaissance in manufacturing that we're all...
So final question before I go to all of you. What do you want the Froman legacy in the U.S., was it the Winder building? What's the Froman legacy going to be at the U.S. Trade Representative Office?
I think that the Obama legacy is going to be...
Well, there's Carla Hill's legacy, there's the Mickey
Froman
Cantor legacy.
I hope that the legacy of this administration is that we have unlocked opportunity for American farmers and ranchers and workers by opening these markets abroad, by setting high standard rules, by leveling the playing field, and by fully enforcing our trade rights. And I think we're well on our way towards doing that.
Thank you. Let me open up the floor to all of you. Don't be shy. Questions, comments, answers right here in the back. We have a runner here. We're going to all applaud you. What's your name? Jess? Jess is going to make it happen. Yes, sir.
Thank you. First, this is very, very informative, but I must also say very entertaining. So thank you for that. My question is about the nature of the dialogue you have in your trade discussions with trade partners, but also internally in terms of factoring in corporate taxation and currency.
Corporate taxation and currency. Currency is a big deal.
Yeah, corporate taxation we don't really deal with in a trade context. And our Treasury colleagues, of course, have their own dialogues with their partners around the world on that. You know, currency has become a very salient issue. There's a lot of interest in it in Congress and among stakeholders. And it's a challenging issue. And obviously, again, the Treasury Department has the lead on it, but it's an issue that we do consult with our various stakeholders and with Congress to determine how best to deal with it. It's an issue we take very seriously as administration. From the start of the administration, from the president on down, in their engagement, for example, with China, we pushed China to move towards a more market-oriented exchange rate. And in June 2010, they began to let the Chinese currency appreciate again. And it's appreciated in 16% in real terms since that period. Not far enough, not fast enough. The IMF says they're modestly undervalued when they used to be significantly undervalued, but we still need to continue to push to make sure that they're not engaging in a misalignment of their currency.
Are you worried about competitive devaluations? In the sense like, Japan right now is taking a lot of steps, fiscal and monetary steps to kind of prime its economy, get it going. But one of the products of that, which we've decided is not currency manipulation, but other people will disagree, is that the yen has depreciated quite a bit, which puts a lot of pressure on Korea, China, and others. And so in that, do you worry about a currency devaluation war?
I think we do worry about that, and it's transparency, participation, and accountability. We publish what we're going to regulate. We publish the draft regulation. We invite public comment from anybody, Americans, Europeans, anybody from around the world, businesses, civil society groups, labor, individuals, academics, and then the regulators are required to take that input into consideration and to justify their regulation based on evidence and science. And we think that that kind of approach over time can also help bridge these differences.
Evidence and science.
Evidence and science.
Remember when those prevailed.
Yes, very important. On the politics in Europe, clearly there is a movement in Europe that is concerned about what's going on there. We've had trade politics in this country for more than 20 years, and I think for the first time Europe is beginning to experience trade politics. I think that's a useful debate to have. I think it's important, as it is important here, that we have a very open and robust debate with the public, with stakeholders, about what it is we're doing through our trade agreements, how it's going to affect them, what the trade-offs are, why we're going about doing this, and how it relates to their economic well-being and to their way of life. And I think we're very much engaged in that debate here, and I think our European colleagues are engaging in that debate now in Europe as well.
Thank you. Huda Faruqi. And you've got a mic here, Huda.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for today's session. It's really most informative. Mr. Froman, I'd like to ask, how do you feel about the Export-Import Bank of the United States and the support that should be forthcoming, taking into consideration, you mentioned that there's an increasing number of exporters, and that's great, and progress has been made along those lines. But compared to the rest of the world, we still really export a very small percentage compared to other countries in terms of the number of companies from the
I should add to Huda's point that Kevin McCarthy, the new majority leader in the House of Representatives, has said that he's inclined to let the authorization of the Exim Bank expire.
Exactly, and there is a battle looming on the
So
horizon.
what is Kevin McCarthy, how would you respond to Kevin McCarthy's apathy about...
I think it's vital that the Export-Import Bank be reauthorized. It's created I think 1.2 million jobs over the last 5 years. It's not just a bank for big companies. About 90% of the loans go to small and medium-sized businesses. About 20% of its balance sheet goes to small and medium-sized businesses. And we're operating in a very competitive environment out there with our trading partners having their equivalent of Exim Bank is sometimes a multiple of ours. I mean, Brazil's equivalent of our Exim Bank is 10 times as large. China has a very active program of trade
Japan.
finance. Japan,
huge.
Europe. And so to strengthen our economy, and that helps support a strong military presence and a strong capacity to deploy power and influence around the world. But equally, or even more importantly, through trade, we're setting rules of the road, we're creating habits of cooperation, we're strengthening key partnerships, and we're promoting development. And I think in all those ways, as Steve said, trade can not only be of strategic and foreign policy importance to the United States, but also be part of the glue that keeps countries together. You know, we just take a look at TPP. At a time when there are tensions over maritime security or other issues between Japan and Korea, or between Japan and China, between Philippines and China, now more than ever, people want TPP to be one of the pieces of glue that hold the countries together and hold the U.S. in the region. And that's why it's got great strategic importance.
Yes, right here.
Good morning. My name is Alejandra Foster, and I come from El Paso, Texas, so it's on the border. And I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts about NAFTA, because we kind of went all over the world, but Mexico and Canada are among our top trading partners, and you know, you're talking about the glue that holds country together. They're the two neighbors.
Yeah, NAFTA. And can I amend your question just a little bit? So I talk about NAFTA and how you've seen it. Many of the leading CEOs like Paul Jacobs of Qualcomm and others have been saying, look, they hope a lot of American manufacturing returns and is revived in America, but they see basically Mexico as the most likely place with the skills, the investment, all the right factors of become a new Korea or China-like platform that they argue would be really great for America. So my amended question is, how is NAFTA, and is NAFTA the old way to look at things? Is there a new realm of opportunity with Mexico that we haven't talked much about?
Well, and of course, Canada and Mexico are also part of TPP. And TPP is our opportunity to renegotiate elements of NAFTA and to build on it, and to create a different type of trading relationship with those countries and the rest of the region going forward. You know, there's a great debate over NAFTA. And NAFTA in the United States, unlike I think in Mexico and Canada, has more of a negative connotation than anything else. But it's interesting, when you take out, when you actually look at the numbers, because you mentioned the trade deficit and Clyde Prestowitz's trade deficit, that when you take out energy, because energy, the flows of energy, both supply and demand of energy, have nothing to do with trade agreements. There wasn't a big tariff on them before, and there wasn't much of a benefit after. When you take out energy, the United States has a trade surplus with our NAFTA partners in manufacturing, in services, and in agriculture. You wouldn't know that from the debate over NAFTA, but we actually have a strong trading relationship with both Canada and Mexico. You know, 40% of what we import from Mexico is U.S. content. It starts in the U.S., it goes to Mexico, it goes into a product, it comes back. Only 4% of what we import from China is U.S. content. And so I think it is important that we build on the North American competitiveness and see North America as increasingly an integrated supply chain, an integrated production chain. We have a lot of work to do at the border in terms of facilitating infrastructure so that we have more fluid and secure trade across the border. And we have a lot of cooperation that we can do with Mexico and Canada to build on this relationship, and TPP gives us an opportunity to do that. But just to go back, you know, when President Obama was candidate Obama, he said it's important to renegotiate NAFTA. And what that meant was, in NAFTA, labor and environment were literally sideshows. Yeah. They were side agreements, not fully enforceable in the same way as the rest of the agreement. And what we're doing through TPP is exactly that. We're renegotiating NAFTA, bringing labor and environment into the core of agreement, strengthening the obligations, and making them binding and fully enforceable. And so this is part of that promise. You
know, Mike, I know you've got Ambassador Froman. I know you have a flight to catch. But I wanted to just finish one thing. You know, if you read the president's national security strategy in his first term, and now we're waiting for the new national security strategy of the second term. They're overdue. We're waiting every day. I'm harassing the White House. But trade and economic policy and getting the U.S. economy in a healthier case dominated that national security strategy report. It was one of the most interesting national security strategy reports I think ever produced, because it dealt so little with the broader external crises and said, well, the way America leads in the world is by getting its economic equation right. And trade was a very big important part of it. So are you, Do your cabinet colleagues, do your pals in the Obama team treat you as sort of the under the radar screen general? Do they see you part of the national security profile in the country? Do they treat you with a kind of martial respect?
We have a great interagency team, and I couldn't ask for anything more. And not just the economic team. Secretary Pritzker, Secretary Liu, Secretary Perez of the Labor Department, Secretary Vilsack, very active from USDA's perspective. But John Kerry is out there talking about trade. Chuck Hagel is writing op-eds about the Asia rebalancing strategy and the importance of TPP. These guys really get it, and they understand that this is a key part of maintaining the position of the U.S., maintaining U.S. leadership, U.S. power and influence, and supporting our broader foreign policy and national security goals. And they have all been incredibly supportive and helpful of what we're doing.
I'm really thinking hard right now of something to challenge Ambassador Froman on so that we can bet over a case of Epic beer, and I might win. So we'll have to work on that. But I want to thank Ambassador Michael Froman for sharing us not only the trade stuff, but the human stories behind trade. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.